Hi everyone, it's William with the 1921 Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series. I'm sharing Dmitri's pessimism and gloom today, I think. He, from a distance, will be talking about what's going on in his country, and I am feeling pretty pessimistic about my own country, albeit not from a distance, not as an exile. He has Coco Chanel to come to the rescue. I have my retreat to the Swiss Alps coming up at the end of March. So hopefully everything will go smoothly with that. I'm very glad that I renewed my passport last year, and I definitely would recommend to any of you in the U.S. who have not done that to do that before, there's any kind of government shutdown or I don't know. I don't want to try and foist my anxieties or my political views onto other people. That's just how I'm feeling today. So I can sympathize a little bit with Dmitri, although I have to say, if there is a theme of this particular video, it's probably that human beings have a tendency of contradicting themselves at least 5 times a day. So you will see what has inspired me to make that statement. Another theme for today will be Mother Russia, and you can't talk about Mother Russia without talking about the Russian soul. I guess the great Russian soul, as it has been called, although Dmitri here does not refer to it explicitly, although he has in other diary entries. Okay, so the recap is, short. So last video, we did 2 diary entries, the 14th and 15th of March, that were just a series of basically get-togethers, including with Coco and Dmitri keeping out all the details of what was going on, just being sort of in a lousy mood and just basically jotting down that he went to such and such place, including tea with Coco in Versailles. And today we have, for our cast of characters, 0. We have no individuals whom we will be talking about, only groups of people, primarily being the Kronstadt rebels. So I'm sure all of you have just been waiting with bated breath for Dmitri to return to the subject of the Kronstadt uprising. He mentioned it in the long diary entry of the 15th of March, and now he's returning to it, having gone through the events of his daily life, what was going on in Berlin, and then in the last few days in Paris. Now that he's writing the long diary entry of the 31st of March, everything in Kronstadt has been resolved. So he's returning to that subject to wrap it up before he gets into more personal things. Excuse me. So yeah, that's basically what we'll be doing today. And you may wonder, what has happened to all these other things? What has happened to the Trepov group? What has happened to Dmitri's own little information bureau, as he called it? What's happened to Googie, to Marie-Louise? And some of those things we'll be returning to, and some we won't, because this is such a pivotal moment in his life that we'll be learning about in this long diary entry of 31st March. Okay, so, and I'm going to give you a long section of it today, but I wanted to get in everything to do with Kronstadt that he writes, and we don't have to go back over the Kronstadt uprising because we talked about it at length in previous videos when Dmitri talked about it, and if anybody wants to brush up on it, You know, the Wikipedia entry is a good place to start. And there's lots of fascinating information out there about it. So I encourage you to do that. But meanwhile, we're just kind of going to go straight through what Dmitri is saying about it. All right. So this is the first section of the long diary entry of 31st March 1921. It was a Thursday, and Dmitri was not writing this in Paris. He was writing it at room 66 of the Riviera Palace Hotel in Monte Carlo. And let us just say that he was not in Monte Carlo alone. Although we have Coco on hold for just a little while longer as we begin this long diary entry. Okay, so I haven't yet looked up the Riviera Palace to see if it's still there, so I'll delay that for when Dmitri and Coco actually arrive there. All right, here we go. Unfortunately, my assumption that nothing would come of the Kronstadt uprising turned out to be true. The Bolsheviks succeeded in crushing the movement. They took the fortress by force of arms, but the thing that helped them most was internal dissent among the ranks of the rebels themselves. Reports say that among the Red Army soldiers who surrendered to the Kronstadt rebels, there were provocateurs who, in short order, created internal hostility and caused disintegration among the sailors. In a word, the whole thing is now a non-issue. The Kronstadt uprising can be viewed as the first internal movement to have risen up against the Soviet government. But for now, it can't be elevated into something of extreme importance or decisiveness in the history of the revival of Russia. It was an attempt, but an attempt which, from my point of view, was carried out using worthless tools, by which I mean the slogans that the sailors, the pride and joy of the Kerensky movement, adorned themselves with. As I wrote in my earlier entries, there was too little in the movement of a purely national Russian character. There were thundering shouts, democratic exclamations, but there was no Mother Russia. The movement was based on the platform of the provisional government, and that alone ensured that it could not succeed. Perhaps if the external circumstances had been different, Kronstadt could have held out longer. For example, if the movement had begun in the spring after the ice had thawed, then there would have been no way to reach the fortress and the Red Army couldn't have launched an assault. But in my opinion, even that factor would only have prolonged the agony of the fortress because it would still have had to surrender when the provisions ran out. And to assume that the example of Kronstadt could spread throughout Russia is, in my opinion, very naive. Of course, as I see it, the slogans of the socialist revolutionaries will never be able to arouse mass enthusiasm among the people and rouse all of Russia into one general uprising against the Bolshevik regime. Okay, so that's that for Kronstadt. Yeah, some interesting things in here. Well, so Dmitri is pointing out that this is the first, it's important to him. I don't know, if I would say what he's saying is accurate, but that it's the first internal rebellion, the first rebellion within Russia against the Soviet government, the Bolsheviks. And so, it's hard to imagine how important this was seen to the monarchist and non-monarchist people like the socialist revolutionaries, the emigres in exile, and how much hope it inspired in them, only to be crushed. And Dmitri had more or less protected himself from that in advance by being pessimistic about the whole thing from the very beginning, unlike his cousin, Prince Olga of Denmark. All right, I mean, here's where things are a little contradictory. Not really, because he has made this, expressed this opinion in the past, that insofar as the Kronstadt rebellion was one that was along the lines of the Kerensky movement, meaning the liberal democratic provisional government, it wasn't going to work. and him saying that these sailors are the pride and joy of the Kerensky movement is a bit much. They were definitely to the left of the Kerensky movement, which, yeah, I would say anyway. And so, Dmitri all along, from the beginning of the Civil War, interestingly to me at least, has really focused on the idea of slogans. So kind of slogans with a capital S, not just, like an advertising slogan, Coke is the real thing or whatever. But the idea that the people need to be swayed by something that just really gets them fired up on the one hand and fired up in the right direction on the other. And his belief has been two things. That one, his first inclination was that it should be religious, that it should be a call to the cross, not just a call to the cross, but a call to the Orthodox cross. And of course, that's very difficult to do when you have when you have a war going on and bloodshed and atrocities being committed. That's really not the time for that kind of appeal to the people who are, being slaughtered, now by one side, now by the other. Okay, so I think he was wrong about that. The other thing is this idea of the national, but not really even so much the national. He says the national, but Mother Russia isn't a national idea. The Russian Empire is a national idea. Mother Russia is not a national idea. Mother Russia is a mystical idea. It's an existential idea. It goes along with the idea of the great Russian soul that you see in figures like Dostoevsky. And this is the first time in these recent diary entries that Dmitri has used this term, Mother Russia, instead of the term the motherland, Rodina. So that's interesting. For what it's worth, I find that interesting. So he's not necessarily saying that it was a bad thing that they were making these thundering shouts and these democratic exclamations, just that what difference did it make? As long as they left Mother Russia out of the equation, it wasn't going to get anywhere. So, one of the things that they didn't like about him in Berlin is that he insisted that for the monarchies to be restored in Russia, it was going to have to come after a successful Kerenskyite sort of movement in Russia with another constituent assembly, with the people coming together and deciding spontaneously by themselves through a democratic process that they did want a new monarchy. They did want another monarchy. So yes, it's a little bit contradictory for him to be talking now about, the Kerensky movement. That was what sunk this whole thing. But anyway, it is what it is. And yeah, it's not so much in this part of the diary entries of the 31st March that he's being more sort of hypocritical, or not so much hypocritical as contradicting himself. Anyway, he's right. If Kronstadt could have held out longer, if it had been later in the year, and so the ice thawed, that the Bolsheviks would not have been able to launch the attack. They actually launched an attack over the ice with infantry walking across the ice and storming the fortress. And if the ice had melted, they couldn't have done that. But he's also right, of course, in pointing out that the downside of being on an island is that once you run out of provisions, you run out of provisions. Okay. Yeah, and now he switches from talking about the Kerenskyites to talking about the socialist revolutionaries, and I'm not quite sure why. And, saying that this idea that Kronstadt is going to, ignite the fuse that will spread throughout all Russia and eventually lead to the overthrow. But then he brings in the socialist revolutionaries and says the slogans of the socialist revolutionaries will never be able to arouse mass enthusiasm among the people. Yeah, that's undoubtedly true. Anyway, there's really not much more to be said about that. Starting tomorrow, for probably the next 2 videos, we're not going to talk about Kronstadt, but we are going to talk about political things, and specifically about the repercussions of Dmitri's. Finally, we get down to the nitty-gritty of the repercussions of his showing in Berlin, and how it came to disturb him so deeply. And I was surprised, because it's been a long time since I'd read this, and I know that he was deeply distressed and upset and depressed about what then happened in Paris, but I didn't remember the details. And so I was actually surprised. And, I think you'll find it very interesting. I'm a little bit, it's not Dmitri at his best. It's not Dmitri at his best. He's in this horrible mental state. And he's going to be grasping at some things that I find a little embarrassing. And, but I'm committed to frankness and to not censoring or leaving anything out of the diary account. And you'll have to make up your own mind if you think that what he will be saying in the next few diary entries is something horrible or not. Or if it's horrible, if it's something that's understandable given the position he was in, or if it kind of really undermines your opinion of him. But anyway, maybe I'm just in myself a particularly pessimistic mood at the moment. So anyway, I will leave it with that, and I hope to see you next time to consider this, to continue this journey together with myself, with you, and with Dmitri, working through some of these interesting Russian historical and also human themes. All right, take care. Bye.